Hey there folks, it's Blue here at Blue Bears Games, and for the third week in a row, I will be unboxing and upgrading one of the Warhammer 40k Commander Precons. This week, I will be doing the Tyranid Swarm Precon, and from what little I saw beforehand, I have a feeling I'm going to really like this deck. Before I rip into the box, let's talk about the general for a moment. The suggested general is called the Swarmlord, which is a 6-mana, 5/5 legendary Tyranid with two very familiar abilities. The first ability is called Rapid Regeneration and states that the Swarmlord enters the battlefield with two +1/+1 counters on it for each time you've cast your commander from the command zone this game. The second ability is called Xenos Cunning and states that whenever a creature you control with a counter on it dies, draw a card. Right off the bat, I can see some very obvious similarities to one of my own personal builds, Tyranid, with a strategy of +1/+1 counters and card draw. I'm quite happy about this because there are probably some pretty nice goodies that I can scavenge from this to add to my own build. So let's just rip this bad boy open and see if I am correct. So here's the box. It's the same as the other boxes except for it has a different graphic on it. I'll just show you the front and the back real quick. It's the Tyranid Swarm one. It's the one that's red, blue, and green. That's the front. Here is the back. So nothing too exciting. So we're just going to open the box up and I'll show you what's inside. If it comes out. There we go. So as the other ones had, it has all the chits and everything on them. And then here's the deck. Here's the little insert. Here's the life counter. I'll zoom it in, or I'll show you a little closer. And then here's the box. Like I said on the other ones, great box. Love how they have the older boxes that they don't use anymore. I wish they still would. And I'll show you what that looks like. So I'm happy with the boxes, that's for sure. All right, so the important part, we'll zoom in just a little bit, and we'll show you what the actual deck contains. So let me open that up, if I can, because I don't have nails or anything like that, and these things are not as easy as they used to be. All right, split the deck in half, and I'll show you what we got. All right, so as I showed you before, the actual main commander that they want you to use is the Swarmlord. So I've already told you what it does, so let me move on to the secondary one. The secondary one is Magus Lucia Kane. So all three colors +1 for a 1/1 that has Spiritual Leader. It says at the beginning of combat on your turn, you put a +1/+1 counter on target creature, which is nice for the way that this deck wants to run. And then it has a second ability that's called Psychic Stimulus. You tap it to add 2 colorless mana to your mana pool, and when you next cast a spell with X in its mana cost, or activate an ability with X in its activation cost this turn, copy that spell or ability, and you may choose new targets for the copy. So kind of a cool little idea, and I don't know what direction I'm going to go in for the upgrade guide, but this is a pretty cool secondary commander. It's great to build around, but it also helps with the main idea of this deck, which is very similar to my Pure and Toothy deck that I've made for myself. Next up is Genestealer Locust. It's 4 to cast 3/3. Has an ability that says whenever a creature attacks you, it gets -1/-0 until end of turn. And then whenever a creature attacks one of your opponents, it gets +0/+1 until end of turn. Acolyte of Hybrid, 3 to cast 2/2. Heavy Rock Cutter is its ability's name. Whenever Acolyte Hybrid attacks, destroy up to 1 target artifact. And if an artifact is destroyed this way, its controller draws a card. Aberrant, it's a 1 green, 1 of any, and X for a 0/0 that has Ravenous. Ravenous is an ability that's very prominent in this deck. It's actually a pretty cool ability in my opinion, just because I like the Pure and Toothy deck that I have, so this actually follows that a little bit. That's why I was so excited to open this deck up. And Ravenous means that this creature enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it, but if X is 5 or more, you draw a card when it enters play. A lot of decks that want to do this type of a theme, so like I said, the Pure and Toothy deck, which is a Hydra Tribal, or whatever deck that you do that's an idea that has X in the cost for all the creatures they enter with +1/+1 counters. Ravenous is one of the better ones because when X is 5 or more, you can gain fuel in your hand to be able to keep going. It also has Trample, and then it has whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you destroy target artifact or enchantment that player controls, which is a great ability. It's actually quite useful. Alright, Pure Strain Genestealer is a 3 to cast 1/1. It enters the battlefield with 2 +1/+1 counters on it, so it enters as a 3/3. So good stats right there. Vanguard Species is the ability. It says whenever it attacks, you may remove a +1/+1 counter from it. And if you do, you search your library for a basic land card, put on the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle, which is a really good ability as well. Tyranid Invasion, 4 to cast Sorcery. Create a number of 3/3 green Tyranid warrior creature tokens with Trample. equal to the number of opponents that you have. So if you have 3 opponents, you create 3 of them. Trigon Prime, it is 4 to cast for a 4/4, and its ability says whenever it attacks, you put a +1/+1 counter on it and a +1/+1 counter on up to 1 other target attacking creature, and that creature can't be blocked this turn. Venom Thrope, 3 to cast 2/2, has flying, death touch, and hexproof. That's actually a pretty good card all around. Not sure if it fits the theme of this deck so much other than the fact that it's a Tyranid, but I mean, it's a great card. Goliath Truck, 4 to cast 4/4 vehicle, has to be crewed by 2, and then whenever it attacks, you put 2 +1/+1 counters on another target attacking creature. Lots of counters, love it. Aetherize is a reprint, return all attacking creatures to their owner's hand. Inspiring Call, another reprint, draw a card for each creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it, and those creatures gain indestructible until end of turn. This is actually a really good card in general. If I had more of them, I would put this in Ayula. I don't have too many of them, though. I need to get more. Once I do, it will go in my Ayula deck. Bred for the Hunt, reprint. Hull Breach, good reprint. 2 to cast, it's removal. So you get to choose to either destroy an artifact, an enchantment, or artifact and enchantment. So the reason why it's worded that way is because if you don't have a target on the field, it will fizzle the spell, so it gives you the option to not have to choose both. Herald's Horn, great reprint for a deck that's tribal. This is a Tyranid tribal deck so far. Soul Ring, naturally. Some of the lands we're going to get into. Ash Barrens has basic land cycling. Frontier Buviak comes into play tap version of a dry land. It's not a triome. Unclaimed Territory. Cultivate. Good ramp section there. Explore. Farseek. Harrow. New Horizons. It's an enchantment form of ramp, sort of. Same thing with Overgrowth. Rampant Growth. Arcane Signet. Cave of Temptation. I actually like this in a lot of my budget decks. I'm not sure I would have put it in this deck, but I like it in my budget decks. It's a filter land, so it taps to add a colorless. You can pay 1 and tap it to filter any color, or you can pay 4, tap and sack it to put 2 +1/+1 counters on any creature. Command Tower, naturally. Evolving Wilds. Let's see. Gene Stealer, Patriarch, a new card. Okay, 5 to cast 4/4. Whenever it attacks, put an infection counter on target creature defending player controls, and then whenever creatures with an infection counter on it dies, you create a token that's a copy of that creature, except it's a Tyranid in addition to its other types. So it's kind of cool because you can actually hit one of your opponent's commanders, and then you can basically get a copy of it. Exocrine, 3 and X. It's a 2/2 with Ravenous. I explained Ravenous earlier. And then whenever it enters the battlefield, it deals X damage to each player and each other creature. Actually, not bad. The Red Terror, great name. 4 to cast 4/3. Whenever a red source you control deals damage to 1 or more permanents and or players, put a +1/+1 counter on the Red Terror. Scream Killer. I'm sorry. That's Screamer Killer. Weird name. 5 to cast 5/5 with Trample. And then it has whenever you cast a creature spell with mana value 5 or greater, it deals 5 damage to any target. So not bad for higher casting costs, especially when you're using X spells like this deck does. Biophagus, I guess is how it's said. It's 2 to cast 1/3. That taps to add a mana of any color, and if this mana was spent to cast a creature spell, that creature enters the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on it. This is a really good card for this deck specifically. May even be put into my Piran Toothy deck. Alright, Bone Sabers, 30 cast and equipment. Whenever a equipped creature attacks, put 4 +1/+1 counters on it, and it equips for 3. I mean, that's passable, I guess. That would be one of the choices that'll come out later. Broodlord, it's a 4 and X Tyranid for 3/3 with Ravenous. And then when it enters the battlefield, distribute X +1/+1 counters among any number of other target creatures you control. I really, really like this deck. Clamavus, 5 to cast 3/3. The ability is that each creature you control gets +1/+1 for each +1/+1 counter on it. Again, another candidate possibly for my Piran Toothy deck. It's a really good card for a deck like this. Harrow Specs, 4 to cast 2/2. Whenever another creature dies, put a +1/+1 counter on Harrow Specs, and then you can tap it to remove X +1/+1 counters from it and add X mana of any one color. Good card too. Let's see, Hierophant Biotitan. It is a 12 to cast 12/12 that says that as an additional cost to cast this spell, you may remove any number of +1/+1 counters from among creatures you control, and this spell will cost 2 generic mana less to cast for each counter removed this way. Then, it also has Vigilance, Reach, and Ward 2, all great abilities. And then it also has that it can't be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less, so it can't be chump blocked. No trample, though. That's a shame. Alright. Hornagaunt Horde, I guess that's how you say it. Hormagaunt. 1 green and X for a 1/1 with Ravenous. So it's already a 1/1. It's not a 0/0, so that's at least you can cast it for the 1 green if you need to. And then it has whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you may pay 3. And if you do, you can return it from your graveyard to your hand. I like that card a lot, actually. Lictor, 4 to cast 3/3 with Flash, which means it can be cast anytime you can cast an instant. And then when it enters the battlefield, if a creature entered the battlefield under an opponent's control this turn, you create a 3/3 green Tyranid Warrior creature token with Trample. Not bad, especially at that casting cost. Or mana value, whatever. Nexos, 2 to cast 2/2. Basic lands you control have additionally that they can tap to add 2 colorless mana, but you can only spend that mana on costs that contain an X in it. Old One Eye. Sounds like me, I can only see out of one eye. 6 to cast 6/6 with Trample, so even stats there. Other creatures you control have Trample, so that's good. And then when Old One Eye enters the battlefield, you create a 5/5 green Tyranid creature token. So casting cost to power toughness plus the token. So far, so good. Is there a downside? Let's see. At the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, you may discard 2 cards, and if you do, you return it from your graveyard to your hand. There is no downside to this card. This is just pure, goodness. Old One Eye is a good card. Sporocyst, so it is a 1 green and 2X for a 0/0 with Ravenous. I'm going to explain the 2X because a lot of people get this confused. You declare a value, so if you declare 4, you have to pay 4 for each X, so that would be 8. If you declare 2 as the number for X, you have to pay 2 twice. That's how that works. Has Ravenous, Defender, so it's a blocker only. And then when it enters the battlefield, you search your library for up to X basic land cards, put them onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. So that's actually not too bad. Tyranid Swarm. It's a 1 green and X for 0/0 with Ravenous. And then when it dies, create a number of 1/1 green Tyranid creature tokens equal to its power. Huh. I like this deck a lot. Let's see. This is Tervagon. It's 2 and X. Has Ravenous, Trample. And then when it deals combat damage to a player, you create that many 1/1 green Tyranid creature tokens. I really like this deck a lot. Toxicrene, 4 to cast for a 2/4 with Reach and Death Touch. Reach and Death Touch are really nice together. And then all lands have tap to add 1 mana of any color and lose all other abilities. Okay, so it turns everything into a command tower for the most part. I mean, it's not really a command tower. I can't say City of Brass either because City of Brass does damage to you, mana confluence does damage to you. This just turns all your lands into all 5 color, being able to tap for it, so not bad actually. Tyrant Guard is a 3 and X, so 1 green, 2 generic, and X for a 3/3 with Ravenous. And then it also has Sacrifice it to have creatures you control with counters on them gain Hexproof and Indestructible until end of turn. A Talon Jackal is 3 to cast for a 2/2 with Trample and Haste. And then when it deals combat damage to a player, you may search your library for a basic land card and put it on the battlefield tapped. It has a lot of ramp choices in here. Really cool that they did that. Let's see, this is Death Reaper Terror Weapon. It's a 4 to cast 3/3 with Flash again, Haste, and then if it says creatures you control that enter the battlefield this turn have Double Strike. The first Tyrannic War is all 3 colors and 2, so 5, for a Saga. The first chapter says you may put a creature card from your hand onto the battlefield. If its mana cost contains X, it enters the battlefield with a number of +1/+1 counters on it equal to the number of lands you control. That could be pretty good, actually. And then the last 2 chapters are double the number of each kind of counter on target creature you control. So, not bad. Back half of the deck, probably going to see a lot of the lands here. Gargoyle Flock is a 4 to cast 2/2 flyer. It says at the beginning of your end step, if a creature entered the battlefield under your control this turn, create a 1/1 blue Tyranid Gargoyle creature token with flying. I like that card. That's actually not bad. Gerson Starn Kellermorph. And I'm probably butchering the name, but whatever. 3 to cast 3/2 with Ward 2. And then it has whenever another source you control deals exactly 1 damage to a permanent or player, Gerson also deals 2 damage to that permanent or player. Not bad, actually. Alright, Melanthrope, I think is how it's said. 3 to cast 2/2 flyer. And when it enters the battlefield, exile target player's graveyard and put a +1/+1 counter on it for each creature card exiled this way. Moloch, it is a red, green, and X for a 2/2 with Ravenous again. And it says when it enters the battlefield, it fights up to one target creature an opponent controls, and if that creature would die, you exile it instead. Ravener, 1 blue, 1 green, and X for a 0/0 with Flash and Ravenous, so you can cast it anytime you can cast an instant. It has Ravenous, and then when it enters the battlefield, target creature attacks target opponent this turn if able. Shadow in the Warp, 3 to cast for an enchantment. It says the first creature spell you cast each turn costs 2 less to cast. That's actually really good in a deck that has a lot of X spell creatures. And then whenever an opponent casts their first non-creature spell each turn, Shadow in the Warp deals 2 damage to that player. Huh, that's actually not bad either. Tyranid, how did I say that? Harridan. So it's a 6 to cast, 4/4 with flying and ward 4. And then whenever it or another Tyranid you control deals combat damage to a player, create a 1/1 blue Tyranid gargoyle creature token with flying. Like that card as well. I do like this deck. I knew I was going to like this deck a lot. Tyranid Prime, 3 to cast, 0/4 with Evolve. Evolve just says whenever a creature enters the battlefield, if it has a greater either power or toughness, you put a +1/+1 counter on the creature. And then eventually it'll get too big so it won't get counters anymore. But it depends because this is an X-Spell creature deck, so it can get really big. Then it also has other creatures you control have Evolve, which is awesome. I really do like this deck. This is the one I would play if I was to keep it together and play it. Winged Hive Tyrant. It is a 5 to cast 4/4. Flying, haste, and then other creatures you control with counters on them have flying and haste. Not bad. Zoanthrope. It is a 1 red, 1 blue, and X for a 0/0 with Ravenous again. Flying, ward 2, and then when it enters the battlefield, deal X damage to any target. Starstorm, it's a reprint. Abundance is a reprint that I love a lot. Abundance has a great synergy / combo with Sylvan Library because it allows you to choose up to 3 cards, put them in your hand, and you don't have to put any back or spend any life, and I'll get into that later if anybody wants me to. Death's Presence, another reprint. Hardened Scales, good for this deck. Imagine if they would have actually put any of the token or the counter doublers in this deck. That would have been really crazy. Icon of Ancestry. Cinderglade, so we're going to hit the lands now. Exotic Orchard. Game Trail, they're all like basic budget lands. Temple of Abandon. I mean, I use them for my budget decks too because it's the only way you can do it because lands are expensive, but Temple of Epiphany. Temple of Mystery. Opal Palace. Path of Ancestry. It's good for this deck. Rugged Highlands. Terramorphic Expanse. Thornwood Falls. And then I think the rest of it's going to be basics. So we got mountains, islands, forests, and then of course we've got the thick commander that comes with all the new stuff. A little bit thicker than all the rest of the cards, as you can tell. And then the tokens. So it's going to be Tyranid tokens. Lots of them because it creates a lot of Tyranids. And I wonder if on the back what it is. It's a Tyranid warrior, a Tyranid gargoyle, and more Tyranids. Bigger Tyranids because the front side, if I'm not mistaken, are 1/1s. It's a 5/5 Tyranid. So that's what's inside the Warhammer 40k Tyranid Swarm Commander Precon. This is my favorite one so far, but I'm a little biased since I already had a similar deck. I'm a huge fan of this style of deck, and if I didn't already have one like it, I'd seriously consider adding it to my 32 deck color challenge with some upgrades. Speaking of upgrades, join me tomorrow where I'll be doing an upgrade guide for this Precon. I have some experience with this theme to say the least, so I believe I know just what I'll suggest. Obviously, I'll do some more research before I make the video, but I'm pretty sure I already know what to do. Anyway, that's all for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you back here tomorrow for the upgrade guide. Have a great day.